Like a lot of the most popular Scotch whiskey brands, Dewar's was started by a father in the mid 1800s and then was later developed and expanded by his sons. In this case, it was John Dewar, who got into the wine and spirits business in the 1840s and then started his own business and started doing his own blending of whiskeys in the 1860s. He passed away in 1880, leaving John Dewar and Sons to his two sons, J.A. Dewar and Tommy Dewar. And together, J.A. and Tommy were like a dynamic duo. They had very different personalities that seemed to suit the growth of this company. J.A. was the management and the organization, while Tommy was the marketing genius who traveled around the world selling and schmoozing about Dewar's. In 1896, they commissioned the building of Aberfeldy Distillery, which went online in 1898. And in 1899, Dewar's White Label was introduced to the world. In 1915, they combined with Buchanan's to form Scotch Whisky Brands Limited. 10 years later, due to struggles of World War I and American Prohibition, they combined with DCL, creating this Scotch whiskey giant that would later become Diageo. Diageo sold Dewar's and Bombay Sapphire Gin to Bacardi for $1 billion and change in 1998. And that's where those two brands live today. As of 2019, Dewar's was the 6th best-selling Scotch whiskey brand in the world. This whiskey seemed to have a short lifespan on the shelves, maybe 15 years at the most. It was called Dewar's Pure Malt in Europe and Dewar's Malt in America. Same labels, same packaging. Both were 12 years old. Here on the American bottle, the word pure is missing. It's just Dewar's Malt, and it says a blend. So what we have here is a blended whiskey, but it's just blended single malts. Today, we'd call that a blended malt. It's also gone by the name of Vatted Malt and Pure Malt. In Europe, it appears as if this whiskey did stay in production until the 1980s. But in America, this was somewhat replaced by a sequel by DCL in 1975. And I have a bottle of that sequel, of that replacement whiskey. And hopefully later this year, I'm going to open that up and we'll compare the two. But today, I'm just going to focus on Dewar's Malt 12-year-old. One of the things that excites me about this whiskey is that though the malts inside are similar in name to malts that are in current Dewar's blends, production methods have changed over the years. Specifically, Aberfeldy, which is supposed to be at the heart of all Dewar's blends. Aberfeldy was still, for instance, floor malting its barley right on the distillery floors right up through 1972. It has had a change in stills since then as well. So though the malt whiskeys are similar in name, the whiskeys themselves are different due to changed production methods. The bottle has a proof measurement and a quart measurement, which puts its bottling in the 1970s or earlier. The tax stamp has U.S. Internal Revenue listed on it. This specific tax stamp was used between 1961 and 1977 because the whiskey was phased out by 1975. And because the bottle doesn't have any of the legalese printed on it that American bottles were required to through 1963, I'm going to narrow this down and say this bottle is from between 1963 and 1975. So let's get to it. Let's open this up here. I'm going to give it about a minute or two to get its bearings. Okay, a minute or two is up and this whole room smells of whiskey. It is kind of industrial, kind of metallic, kind of glassy, kind of dusty. And now there are legitimate malt notes, like malted barley. Toffee pudding, oranges, even has some dried rosemary, Walker's shortbread biscuits. It's very likely that there is peated whiskey in here. But rather than reading as smoke, it reads as sort of a damp, earthy, outdoorsy note, like moss, wet soil, like even maybe a little bit of mushrooms in there. Nostrovia. What I get is earth and bitter herbs and stones and salt with a little bit of sweetness underneath. There's a fruitiness that starts developing with time, sort of like melon and white stone fruits, brown sugar and oranges maybe. It does have this, ooh, there are some sherry casks in here. The nuttiness expands and there's a little bit of dried fruit just around the edges. It's almost like they put some sherry casks in the mix as like a slight seasoning. As far as the finish goes, it has a little bit of that herbal bitterness. There's a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of maltiness, an almond-like nuttiness to it. It's something that doesn't need to be put on the rocks, unless someone finds maybe its bitterness a little bit scary. But I think that would be tempered by putting it just in an old school tumbler. That bitterness would wear out a little bit and be a little more oxidized, maybe a little less rough around the edges. One can drink it in a fancy whiskey glass. That's not something you can say about a lot of blends, even blends from the 1970s. And finally, may I wish you and yours a happy and healthy 2021. Papa! Sounds like my time is up. Cheers.